In the quiet shadows of a Manhattan morning, when the streets exhale yesterday's secrets and even the orchids seem to listen, a name resurfaces, a brooch vanishes, and memory itself becomes the most elusive suspect. This isn't just a case of theft. It's a reckoning of identity, illusion, and the wounds we carry long after justice is served. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Settle in, because this mystery begins now. It was the kind of evening built for Wolfe's orchids and no one else. Manhattan was leaking from the sky, a damp, persistent drizzle that flattened hats and shorted tempers, but didn't have the decency to turn into thunder. Inside the brownstone, the lights were soft, the office warm, and the silence broken only by the low hum of the radiator and the occasional rustle of Wolfe upstairs tending his tropical harem. I was at my desk, feet up, half-heartedly typing a report that was late only by Wolfe's standards, which meant 2 days and counting. Fritz had cleared dinner an hour earlier, and I was nursing a modest sense of peace. No calls, no clients, no cases, just the satisfying knowledge that the worst thing I might have to deal with tonight was Wolfe complaining about fertilizer quality. I was halfway through a sentence about a stolen sapphire when the storm did something unusual. It hesitated. A pause, like the world bracing itself. Then came the doorbell. And that was when I knew. Dinner was over, and peace had packed its bags. We don't get visitors after 10 unless they're trouble, drunk, or both. I glanced at the clock. 10:03. Wolfe was still in the plant room, which gave me exactly one chance to intercept whatever fate had thrown at our stoop before he decided it belonged in his domain. I crossed to the door, not hurrying. Curiosity should never look desperate, and opened it to a figure blurred by rain and city light. She stood there with an umbrella that had clearly lost the war, hair damp, gloves soaked through, and eyes that had seen more than just bad weather. She was polished in the way that takes practice. High heels, pearl clip, coat 3 seasons too expensive for her expression. But her voice was steady when she said, "I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe." "Lot of that going around lately," I said. "You'll have to settle for me first." She looked straight past me. "You already promised." I let her in because she said it like she meant it, and because I didn't like the way she said you. The rain followed her in like a rumour, dripping from her hem and gloves, making a wet patch on the rug Fritz would complain about tomorrow. She peeled the gloves off slowly, with fingers that shook only at the knuckles, then folded them like they mattered. "I'm Evelyn Drake," she said, voice even. "We met last December. You told me if I ever needed help." "Hold it," I said, stepping back. "Miss Drake, I have a head for names, and yours rings no bells in this belfry." She nodded once, not surprised. "You were drinking champagne. It was a war bond gala at the Park Sheraton. You wore a white dinner jacket and told me you'd never forget my perfume." That gave me a mild jolt, because while I didn't remember the jacket, I did recall a scent, something with vanilla and desperation in equal parts. She looked at me hard. "I'm in trouble, and you're the one who said I could come here." At that exact moment, Wolfe's voice floated down from above. "Archie, who's dripping on my floor?" Wolfe had descended, reluctantly, with a scowl tailored for rain and strangers. He took one look at Evelyn Drake, adjusted his housecoat, and settled into the red chair like Rome receiving a barbarian. I introduced them, and she repeated her story, this time with more detail. The gala, the champagne, a note I'd allegedly scribbled on a napkin, promising assistance if ever she needed a friend in a trench coat and good shoes. I denied it, politely, but firmly. "Mr. Wolfe, I've danced with more women than I've promised eternal loyalty to, and I've promised eternal loyalty to none." Wolfe raised a brow. "And yet she is here." "She's mistaken." Evelyn produced the napkin. My handwriting, complete with a smudge that looked uncomfortably familiar. Wolfe took it, examined it like a surgeon would an X-ray. "You have an admirable capacity for forgetfulness, Archie, or a rather alarming one." She added, "You told me if I ever feared for my life, I could come here." "And now you do?" Wolfe asked. She nodded. "I believe someone wants me dead." That got his full attention. Mine too, though mine came with a side of queasy confusion. Wolfe didn't care for surprises, but he disliked loose ends even more. He stared at the napkin for a moment longer, then tucked it beside his chair as if it were evidence in a private trial. "You are not drenched," he observed to Evelyn. "Yet you have clearly been in the rain. Did you walk far?" "From the subway," she replied. 3 blocks. "Why not telephone first?" "Because I thought you'd tell me not to come." "Accurate," he said with no apology. He flicked his fingers toward the side table. "Archie, beer please." That meant the conversation had passed from nuisance to intrigue. I retrieved 2 bottles, one for him, one for myself, and handed them over. Wolfe took a slow sip, then fixed his eyes on her. "Miss Drake, you've come uninvited, with a story based on faulty recollection or forged sentiment. You'll forgive my skepticism." "I don't need you to believe me," she said. "Just him." She pointed at me. Wolfe smiled faintly. "Well, that's unfortunate." She stayed seated, calm as a chess queen boxed in but not yet taken. I stayed standing, mostly, because I wasn't sure I wouldn't bolt. I could feel something in her, a familiarity that scratched behind my eyes but wouldn't resolve. The perfume, the tilt of her head, the way she spoke in clean lines without filler, all of it tried to nudge some door in my head. But the name, still hollow, Evelyn Drake, not on any list I kept in memory or in the office files. "You sure you didn't mean a different man in a white dinner jacket?" I asked. "I hear they're mass-produced now." She looked almost amused. "You wore cufflinks with blue enamel and a chipped corner. Your tie was wrong, navy with silver stripes. You spilled wine on a colonel's wife and called it camouflage." Okay, that was detailed. I didn't remember the woman, but I remembered the tie. "I'm not saying you're lying," I muttered. "Just that my head's not keeping up." "Someone doesn't want it to," she replied softly. That was when Wolfe leaned forward, which in his case counted as shouting. "You believe you're in danger," Wolfe said, "yet you come here, to a private residence, with no proof, no police, and only the vaguest charge of threat. What is it you expect us to do, Miss Drake?" "I don't expect anything," she said, eyes on me. "Only what he offered." Wolfe grunted. "Archie offers many things under the influence of alcohol, flattery, or boredom. Most of them are regrettable," I added. "And few of them include life insurance." "I'm being watched," she said, quiet now. "I've seen the same man 3 nights in a row outside my building. A grey coat, dark hat. Doesn't smoke, doesn't move, just stands." Wolfe sipped his beer. "You haven't gone to the police?" "I don't trust the police. I trust a man who once told me he doesn't like injustice." I opened my mouth to protest, or deflect, but Wolfe cut in. "Miss Drake, I will consider your situation. Archie will take you home." I blinked. "He remembers neither you nor your promise, but we'll begin there." Once she was gone, umbrella dripping on the stoop, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes like a man settling into a bath of very cold logic. The office was quiet, save for the soft fizz of beer in the glass and the far-off grumble of a city still soaked and miserable. "She believes what she says," he murmured, "which is not the same as telling the truth." I nodded slowly. She was detailed. Too detailed, perhaps. Detail in the absence of substance is the favorite weapon of the deceiver. She knew about the tie. Or someone did. And the handwriting. I glanced toward the napkin. Mine, or close. Wolfe lifted one finger. Close is where forgery lives, and where memory falters. I didn't like the way he said memory, like it was the hinge to a trap I hadn't seen yet. I walked her to the door. The street was still slick, the air still humming with storm, and the umbrella was as broken as her timing. She stepped out into the rain with practiced calm, turned the collar of her coat up, and didn't look back. That bothered me more than it should have. I watched her retreat toward the corner, silhouette dimming beneath the lamplight, then shut the door slowly. Behind me, Wolfe's chair creaked. Not with movement, just decision. Something about her was off. Too precise. Too perfect. But something else tickled under the skin. Something that said, maybe I had made a promise, and then let it die in the noise of too many parties, too many distractions. The kind of forgetfulness that comes back with teeth. And I had the uneasy feeling it was just starting to bite. The door clicked shut behind her with the soft finality of a verdict. Outside, the rain had found its rhythm again, a persistent whisper against the windows, like a jury muttering in the hallway. I didn't move. Neither did Wolfe. He'd returned to his chair with the solemnity of a magistrate settling in for sentencing, arms folded over his girth, lips pressed so tight the moustache drooped in protest. The napkin still sat on the side table, like a piece of damning evidence, and Wolfe's eyes, half-lidded, unreadable, flicked toward it once, then back to me. The orchid room upstairs might as well have been a continent away. I could hear the radiator ticking, the brass clock on the credenza humming its soft, accusatory heartbeat. When Wolfe doesn't speak for 20 seconds, it means he's loaded the chamber. When he passes 30, you'd better hope the safety's on. You will tell me, he said finally, exactly what you remember about Evelyn Drake. I shrugged. That she has excellent posture and confidence in wet shoes. Beyond that, I'm drawing a blank. I want a full account, not of tonight, of any event in the last year that may have involved her, however peripherally. That's going to be a long list and a short memory. Then abbreviate. Begin with the Park Sheraton Gala last winter. So he had filed that nugget away. I rubbed my temple and tried to conjure something beyond polite chaos and cheap bubbly. There were dozens of dames, Wolfe. Some wore gloves, some wore perfume. One wore a mink I still have dreams about. Wolfe cut me off with a wave. Archie, you are many things. Unreliable is not among them. When you forget with such insistence, it is either self-preservation or suggestion. I intend to find out which was his way of saying the trial had begun. He reached into the drawer beside him, the one where most of my better days had gone to die, and pulled out a crisp envelope. No return address, no postmark, just my name, in my handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Too instantly. He handed it over like a man passing a sealed confession to the prosecutor. Inside was a single page, lined, typewritten, signed, Archie Goodwin. The tone was friendly. The date was 2 months ago. The subject was Evelyn Drake, her fears, her gratitude, my alleged encouragement to contact me at any hour. I stared at it. The signature was mine, only it wasn't. Cute, I said. Forgery? Wolfe asked. Near perfect, but I didn't write this. No memory of it. None, not a whisper. Then either someone has mastered your affectations, he said calmly, or your recollection is not merely spotty, it is being sabotaged. That landed like a piano dropped from 10 floors up, and I was standing beneath the awning. Before I could respond with something appropriately pithy, Wolfe laid another card on the table. Literally. A photograph, glossy, 6x8, face up. I blinked. There I was, smiling, dancing. And unless someone had grafted my face onto Fred Astaire's body, I was two-stepping with none other than Miss Evelyn Drake. Where did you get this? I asked, keeping my voice level. Anonymous post, this morning. The background was soft focus, candlelight, linen, but unmistakably the ballroom at the Sheraton. I wore a white jacket, She wore a dress that made remembering anything else unnecessary. I touched the edge. It felt real. I have no memory of this. You are in the photograph. I know what I look like. I also know I've never seen this picture or that woman before she showed up dripping on our floor. Then the question becomes, Wolfe said, what else don't you know you know? And that's when I realized he was enjoying himself. He leaned back, the photograph forgotten on the tray beside him, and folded his hands over his vest like an oracle settling into clouds. Memory, Wolfe said, is not a vault, but a garden. Some things are cultivated deliberately, others sprout uninvited. But most telling are the blooms that do not appear, the absences we fail to tend. I raised an eyebrow. Philosophy or gardening? Both. You, Archie, possess a prideful mind. You rely on recall as proof of reality. When that fails, your instinct is not doubt but denial. I opened my mouth. He held up a finger. Not accusation, merely diagnosis. I closed my mouth. And, he added, vanity is the final enemy of truth, particularly when the lie is so well dressed, it could pass for memory. That one I filed away for later, possibly under insults in three-piece suits. I stood, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to stretch my legs and my patience. I took 2 steps to the window, stared out at the wet dark, and said over my shoulder, you ever think maybe you're slipping, Wolfe? Silence. Maybe the great Nero Wolfe finally misread a person. Maybe Evelyn Drake is pulling a long con, and I'm just the sap she picked out of a photo lineup. Still silence. Or maybe, I said, turning back, you're so eager to find intellectual fault that you're willing to believe I've turned into a sentimental amnesiac. Wolfe reached for his beer, sipped, and sighed. You've never been sentimental. Amnesiac remains open to inquiry. I grinned. If I ever do forget myself, it won't be in a dinner jacket. That, he said, would indeed require hypnosis. We both knew the tension hadn't broken. It had just changed costumes. Right on cue, the only man in the house who didn't doubt my memory walked in with a silver tray and a bowl of lamb stew that smelled like home and didn't ask questions. Dinner, Fritz said, like it was the solution to everything. Leave it, Wolfe said, without looking up. Fritz's eyes flicked to me. I shrugged. He retreated like a silent butler in a play too complicated to follow. The stew sat on the tray, steaming in lonely defiance. If Wolfe didn't eat it soon, I would, not out of hunger, just spite. Wolfe leaned over the edge of his desk, pulled open the center drawer, and lifted his massive leather-bound appointment book. It thudded open like scripture. He flipped pages with the solemnity of a priest consulting divine prophecy. Then he stopped, tapped a date with his index finger. Tuesday, March 14th, he said. I leaned over. The line was blank. Your handwriting appears nowhere. Mine neither. Yet that was the day Miss Drake claims you met again. I frowned. We had no visitors that day. None recorded. I looked closer. The gap in the ledger felt deliberate, like a tooth pulled out and the gum stitched shut. You think I erased it? I think someone did, he replied. And until proven otherwise, you remain our prime suspect. That was when the lamb stew started to smell like judgment. Wolfe closed the book with a snap and stared at me with the kind of calm you get right before an orchestra breaks into war. This is intolerable, he said. Our own house has been infiltrated by confusion, coincidence, or something more sinister. It must be rectified. He reached for his beer. You will begin with Evelyn Drake, her building, her contacts, her affiliations. I want names, habits, shadows. If she buys a pretzel on Fifth Avenue, I want to know what mustard she uses. Dijon, I muttered. She strikes me as the type. Wolfe didn't smile. That told me exactly how serious he was. You may go, he said. I went, but not far. I didn't head straight out. I lingered at my desk under the guise of checking my notebook. but really just watching the door I'd closed behind her. Evelyn Drake, if that was her name. I've had women lie to me before, some of them with considerable artistry. But this one didn't sit like a lie. She sat like a mirror I hadn't looked into in years. And Wolfe, he might have been enjoying the puzzle, but I could feel something else in him too. A caution. A crack in the structure. It wasn't that he doubted me, it was that he didn't know if he should, and that coming from Wolfe was worse than an indictment. I picked up my hat and headed into the rain to find a ghost I might have danced with. Or created. The cab let me off half a block from Evelyn's building, which had the look of money that had been around long enough to forget how it was made. The sidewalk gleamed with that polished marble sheen only rain can give Manhattan. Elegant, slippery, and just shy of a lawsuit. I wasn't surprised to see the cop cars already clustered like vultures with sirens gone quiet. What did surprise me was how quickly a case I didn't remember signing up for had turned into a scene that had my name written all over it, in flashing blue lights. I tipped the driver, straightened my tie, and squared my shoulders. The doorman under the striped canopy gave me a look that said he'd seen better nights and worse men. I gave him mine right back. I'd been both. "Miss Evelyn Drake," I said. "She home?" His answer didn't improve the evening. "She came in fast," the doorman said, wiping his palms on his coat as if I'd asked for a confession. Pale, shaking, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "She say anything?" He nodded, then hesitated. Something about a promise, a broken one. Or maybe she said someone broke her. Did she mention me? He squinted. "I don't know. I didn't catch a name. She was talking like she thought I'd understand something I didn't." "Did she go straight up?" "Yeah." Then 10 minutes later, a neighbor calls down because she hears a thud. He looked at the uniformed cops by the door, like they might suddenly start remembering for him. "Then all this." I gave him a nod. He'd told me what he could, which was nothing I wanted to hear. I headed inside, and with every step toward the elevator, I could feel the story bending in on me. And I wasn't sure it would straighten again. The lobby had that hospital quiet feel, plush and polished, but all wrong in the ears. The elevator was cordoned off, so I took the stairs, 2 at a time, past a couple of nosy tenants half-dressed and eager to offer theories I didn't want. I hit the 3rd-floor landing and saw them, uniforms, plainclothes, one camera flash, and that familiar low buzz in the air that always comes with death and bad coffee. It was the same pulse I'd felt a dozen times, except this time it felt closer, heavier, like the punchline was going to have my name on it. I didn't have to push hard to get through the line. A lieutenant saw me and called out, "He's here!" like I'd been expected. I had, just not the way I liked. And standing in the middle of it all, grin ready, arms folded, was Kramer. He looked like a cat with a mouse in each pocket. "Well, well," he said, sauntering up with the kind of pleasure you usually reserve for birthdays and subpoenas. "If it isn't Nero Wolfe's errand boy, arriving just in time to explain why a woman you were seen with earlier tonight is now very, very dead." "Hiya, Kramer," I said. "You been rehearsing that one, or did it come to you in the shower?" He grunted. "Don't get cute. You were with her. She was in our office. That's not a crime yet. She leaves your place. She comes home. She dies." "She died here?" "Inside," he said, jerking his head toward the apartment door. "Collapsed on the carpet. You want to guess what was next to her?" "If it's a corsage and a champagne glass, I'm going back to bed." "Nope," Kramer said. "It's your fingerprints." The silence that followed had teeth. The room was tastefully done. Soft chairs, oil painting over the mantel, a lamp with a fringe that made it look like it should have been casting shadows on cocktails and secrets. But none of it registered first. Evelyn Drake did. She lay on her side, head turned as if she'd been watching the rain when it happened. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, no drama. Just the stillness you don't come back from. She looked more at peace than she had in our office. which made me feel something I didn't like. A patrolman moved aside for me, and Kramer hovered close behind like a mosquito with a badge. Recognize her now? I recognized her before. Just making sure. You seemed a little cloudy on the subject earlier. I crouched beside the body, careful not to touch. Her coat was draped over the arm of the sofa. The umbrella was gone. So was the promise, whatever it was. Kramer pointed to the side table like he was unveiling a surprise birthday cake. There, a tumbler, half full, lipstick smudge faint on the rim. I suppose you want me to toast her, I said. He held up a bagged envelope. Prince, yours, left index and thumb. I didn't answer right away. I've touched a lot of glasses, Kramer. After she accused you of breaking your promise and came here to say she was scared. Sure, looks tidy. You panic, she drinks something she shouldn't, and you walk away clean, or try to. He was fishing, but he had a net now. I didn't hand her that glass, I said. You sure? No, I admitted. I'm not sure of anything tonight. Nice of you to admit it. Saves time. I leaned in to study the glass. The drink was amber, not wine, not champagne. Stronger. It smelled like betrayal and something bitter underneath, which I guessed was the point. Kramer straightened like he was getting ready for a chalkboard and a pointer. She walks into Wolfe's place, says you broke a promise, a little drama. You get nervous, want her to stay quiet. She comes home. You follow her. Maybe to explain, maybe not. Something gets said. She drinks. She dies. And I leave my fingerprints on the glass like a calling card. You're a confident guy, Goodwin. Maybe you didn't think it'd matter. Or maybe you were sloppy. Or maybe, I said, you want this case wrapped up before the morning edition. Hits the stands. He grinned. No, I want it wrapped up before Wolfe has time to twist it into something Latin and irrelevant. I took a breath. You think I killed her. I think you were the last one she trusted, Kramer said, softer now. And that makes you the last one she ever saw. There wasn't much to say to that. Not yet. I took a lap around the room while Kramer watched, arms folded, waiting for me to trip over guilt. Let's start with what's in the glass, I said. You got a toxicology report? It's in process. And you're sure it wasn't suicide? No note, no signs. And you're not that lucky. I nodded toward the body. You see any bruises? Struggle? No. That's the problem. It's too neat. I smiled. That makes two of us. Kramer scowled. You trying to be clever? No, I said. Trying to stay vertical while you hang a murder on a handshake and half a memory. He didn't answer. I want the coroner's timeline. The last person who saw her alive. Her phone records. Her mail. Hell, I'll take her dry cleaning ticket. You playing detective now? I always play detective. You just never like when I beat you at it. He didn't smile. Neither did I. While Kramer glowered, I let my eyes do the walking. Evelyn's purse was missing. A side table drawer sat half open with nothing inside. A rug near the door had been nudged half an inch off its mark, like someone had stepped on it in a hurry. The perfume bottle on the vanity was empty, lying sideways. None of it screamed murder, but it didn't whisper suicide either. I filed it away in the corner of my mind labelled, Wolfe will want this, which sat next to, don't get arrested tonight. And I figured it was time to leave before I made that harder. Kramer let me go with the grace of a man handing over a grenade with a loose pin. Don't go far, he said. I'll be back. Try knocking, I told him. I stepped outside and the rain hit like it had a grudge. Reporters clustered like sharks with notepads, flashbulbs popping. I kept walking, not answering. The city always smells like steam and steel when someone dies. But that night, it smelled like memory. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I'd left a crime scene, or just walked out of one I'd already committed. By the time I got back to the brownstone, my face was famous in a way I hadn't budgeted for. Wolfe having glanced once at the evening papers, snapped them shut with a noise like a bear trap and declared the premises under siege. No calls, no clients, and God help the delivery boy who rang twice. He shut himself in with the orchids like a war general reviewing maps, and not even Fritz's creme brulee could entice him down. When I suggested that some proactive manoeuvring might beat the headlines to the punch, he aimed a glower at me that wilted 3 cattle yas. "This," he said, "is not the hour for action. It is the hour for reflection, and you, Archie, will not leave this house." That, I assure you, was not my preferred weather forecast. By 10 o'clock the next morning, the sidewalk outside looked like a casting call for a bad melodrama. Trench coats, notepads, snapping cameras, and one red-headed dame with enough rouge to paint a battleship. I gave the front curtain a discreet twitch and caught the headline flapping from a newsboy's hand. "Private Eye linked to dead socialite." Behind me, the phone rang for the 12th time and died unloved. Wolfe wouldn't allow it answered. He claimed premature speech endangered the integrity of thought. It was a lovely sentiment, unless your name was printed in bold, underlined, and wrapped around a corpse. If the wolves were at the door, they were the press kind, leaner, hungrier, and harder to shake than any pack I'd met in the Catskills. When Fritz serves lunch without humming, something is off. When he does it in silence, eyes solemn and apron askew, you start looking for exit strategies. He set down the roast chicken like it was a funeral offering. Then, after a pause, he muttered something in the voice of a man who'd seen too many wars and too few victories. "Even fortresses can fall, Archie." That was it. No salt, no pepper, just a doom-laden prophecy from a man whose usual crisis was a collapsed souffle. Wolfe, still upstairs with the orchids, hadn't touched his beer. I had 2 with lunch and considered a third. Fritz's voice stuck in my head like a bad echo, and for once, I didn't answer with a quip. At precisely 4:23, I checked the clock out of boredom, not reverence. Wolfe emerged from his sanctum with the look of a man who had wrestled thought and now needed someone else to wrestle facts. He lowered himself into his chair with more weight than usual and flicked his fingers at me. "Archie, your recollections. Every instance in which Miss Drake may have intersected your social itinerary. Leave nothing unspoken, however trivial it seemed then or seems now." I opened my mouth to wisecrack and thought better of it. He wasn't just looking for a needle in a haystack. He wanted me to build the haystack first. So I started talking. And as I did, I realized how little I liked the feel of the thread we were pulling. "It might have been her," I said slowly, sorting through fog. "There was that ball at the Beaumont Club 3 months ago. Charity thing, black tie, champagne by the gallon, and society names mispronounced over loudspeakers." Wolfe grunted. "Continue." "There was a woman in red gloves, stood out. Good posture, bored eyes. I was on my 3rd glass of warm fizz and watching the auction table when she brushed past. I didn't place her then. Hell, I'm not sure it was Evelyn. But something about her rings a bell now." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Did you speak?" "Nope, just a glance. But I do remember she was looking for someone. Not dancing, not mingling. Just scanning the room like a librarian searching overdue finds." He didn't reply. He only leaned back, fingers templed. And I knew that behind those eyes, something more precise than memory was already working the angles. "It's coming back," I said, slower now, like stepping through molasses. "There was a guy in a tux, older, sharp nose, white streak in his hair. They were out on the terrace, the woman and him." Wolfe's brows inched upward. "Go on." "They weren't whispering. She was angry, not loud, but sharp. She said something about, 'You promised,' and he said, 'You shouldn't have worn it.' Then she looked down and turned away fast." "What was worn?" Wolfe asked. I spread my hands. "Beats me. Could have been a dress, could have been a brooch, could have been a grudge." He grunted again. A grudge cannot be pawned, Mr. Goodwin. Continue remembering. I tried, but the rest was noise. Clinking glasses, a bad saxophone, and a waiter asking me for a tip I never gave. Once my memory had coughed up all it was willing to, Wolfe rang the inner line and had Saul Panzer on the horn in 2 minutes flat. Mr. Panzer, Wolfe said, I require a diagram of Miss Evelyn Drake's movements in the preceding 6 weeks. Every gala, luncheon, and anonymous alley she might have wandered down. Cross-reference photographs, guest lists, newspaper mentions. Spare no detail. I want the undercurrents, not the ripples. Saul didn't argue. He never does. He'll know where to look, Wolfe said after hanging up. Sure, I replied. He reads minds and collects shadows. Better than being misled by memory, Wolfe said, with a look that had weight behind it. And just like that, Saul was in play. And I was still under Wolfe's lamp. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe Wolfe's tone. Maybe Fritz's unease. Or maybe it was just the way guilt echoes when it doesn't belong to you. But I remembered the brooch. At that ball, during the silent auction, there was a brief commotion, not loud, just a few murmurs and a lady gasping. When I looked over, the woman in red gloves was clutching her neckline, and the man with the sharp nose was gone. By dessert, it was a ghost. No announcement, no fuss, no security. But the diamond-studded brooch she'd worn had vanished. And if she was Evelyn, then the quarrel had been more than romantic. I said nothing yet. Wolfe was still processing, but the knot in my gut told me I'd just remembered something a killer was counting on me forgetting. Wolfe began to pace, which for him is what running a marathon looks like. Memory, he muttered, is the most pliable of alibis. A man will forget what he must. A woman, what she dares. I watched him circle the desk like a lion circling a fact. Suppose, he said, more to the air than to me, one desired to conceal a theft but knew the witnesses were uncertain. Suppose the theft caused betrayal, and betrayal led to murder. Then the only thing more useful than a vanishing brooch is a vanished recollection. I swallowed. So now I'm an unreliable narrator. You are a man, he said, with incomplete data. But you are also, to our adversary, a risk. That didn't comfort me. It just made the room feel smaller. When Wolfe turns interrogator, the room gets cold no matter the thermostat. He fixed me with a stare like polished onyx and began. How many drinks had you consumed before encountering the woman? 2, maybe 3, but they were lousy. Was the brooch present before the altercation? I think so. I mean, yeah, pretty sure. You think, Mr. Goodwin. That is not knowing. Did you observe the brooch afterward? No. She left. I didn't follow. He folded his hands. Would you stake your liberty on that sequence? That did it. Wolfe, I said, are you asking if I killed her? He didn't answer. He didn't have to, and that, folks, is how it feels to be the suspect in your own living room, under the lamp, with nowhere to look but in. The front door opened with the softness of a man who didn't need to announce himself, and in stepped Saul Panzer, dry as a banker and twice as cautious. He didn't take off his hat or coat. Just handed Wolfe a brown folder and looked at me like he'd just seen my ghost. Customs records out of Lisbon, he said. 3 flagged entries tied to a woman using the name Drake. Dates match her trips to Europe last year. And this, he slid out a glossy photograph, is from the Hotel Santos lobby cam. Taken in January. I leaned in. It was her all right. Evelyn, black dress, pearl choker, and the same knowing tilt to her chin. But the man next to her wasn't me. Saul added, he's used 3 names in Portugal. One matches the claim. Wolfe's nostrils flared, the only sign he was now fully awake. Saul eased into the red armchair, posture neat, tone flat as Kansas. The brooch, he said, wasn't just sparkly. It once belonged to a Viennese countess named Margaret von Reichen. She fled Austria in 38, landed in Switzerland and vanished during the war. Rumour was The brooch went with her. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, and its surfaces, conveniently, in the décolletage of a Manhattan socialite attending a charity ball. More than surfaces, Saul replied. Evelyn tried to sell it last year in Geneva, using a falsified appraisal. Deal fell through. Too much heat on Nazi-looted art. Then she smuggled it here, Wolfe murmured, and wore it not as adornment, but as bait. Or proof, Saul added. She was tied to at least 2 middlemen fencing post-war duels, one of them found dead in Marseille last May. Wolfe grunted. Miss Drake was no dilettante. She was in deep, and I was, starting to feel wet shoes. Here's the punchline, Saul said, pulling out one last sheet. This is the kicker. It was an insurance form, filed in Manhattan a week before Evelyn died. The claimant, Archie Goodwin. I stared at it. That's not my handwriting. No, Wolfe said, peering over his glasses. But it is your name. And the brooch's disappearance, reported on that date, would have netted a tidy $40,000 had Miss Drake not ended up dead. Saul nodded. The insurer flagged it as suspicious. They'd already paid a similar claim out of Brussels last year, same piece, different name. I swallowed. So someone was staging thefts using her jewelry? No, Wolfe said. Someone was staging Archie Goodwin. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his mind clicking through combinations like a lock being tested for its weakest tooth. My name, misused, was now part of the game. Saul leaned forward, expression taut. I've seen him, twice. Once outside Evelyn's hotel, once on 7th Avenue last fall. Neat dresser, good teeth, better accent. He's not your twin, Archie, Saul added, but the angle of resemblance is close enough, and the forged signature? Perfect. I'd testify it wasn't you, but a banker might not. Wolfe nodded slowly. A man of elegance and tact, skilled in mimicry, and acquainted with Miss Drake's habits. A forger of identity, not merely of ink. I said, so now we've got a killer who's also my stunt double. Great. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Not a killer, not yet. But he has committed the greater offence. He has counterfeited personhood. Which, coming from Wolfe, was about as serious as treason. And frankly, I agreed. Wolfe settled deeper into his chair like a man sinking into a riddle carved in granite. The gravest threat, he murmured, is not violence. It is mockery of order. Theft of identity undermines all civilized process. It is the parasite of truth. I let that hang. This man, Wolfe continued, used your name, your signature, and your shadow. Evelyn lent him credibility. Together, they built a narrative. She the bait, he the claim. But something fractured. I added, like a conscience? No, Wolfe said. More likely greed or betrayal. He needed her. She outgrew him, or demanded too much. And then his voice dropped an octave. And when a counterfeit threatens to reveal the counterfeiter, there is only one remedy: obliteration. He meant murder, but in Wolfe's world, that was the symptom, not the disease. The doorbell rang with the confidence of a man who didn't wait for permission. Fritz opened it, and in barged Inspector Kramer, red-faced, trench coat flapping, and carrying a thin-lipped grin that didn't fit. Well, well, he said. You two look cozy. Care to explain why your boy here filed an insurance claim on a brooch that belonged to a dead socialite? Wolfe didn't rise. Good evening, Inspector. Please, sit. Though I expect you won't. Kramer ignored the chair. The jewelry box in Evelyn Drake's suite had a velvet slot for one missing piece. This brooch, and this claim, he waved the paper like a warrant, bears your assistant's name. I stood. I didn't sign it. You sure? Wolfe lifted a hand. If you intend accusation, state it. If you came to preen, do so elsewhere. Kramer growled, but he wasn't purring anymore. Kramer stayed standing, fists on hips, steam in his voice. I've got motive, forgery, and proximity. What have you got? Wolfe spoke without shifting a fold of fabric. Mr. Panzer, please. Saul rose. Photo of a man accompanying Miss Drake in Lisbon. Not Goodwin. Timeline matches the brooch's movement. Multiple aliases. At least one previous fraud case pending in France. Wolfe added, the claim was filed under Mr. Goodwin's name, yes, but the handwriting, the method, the venue, none align with his known habits. You are grasping shadows, Inspector. Kramer bristled. You defending him? I am defending fact, Wolfe said, which you have momentarily abandoned. Kramer's scowl deepened. If you're wrong, I rarely am. Wolfe leaned back. And when I am, I do not bark. I correct. That got a twitch out of Kramer's cheek. He left the folder and stomped out like a man who'd swallowed a nail. After Kramer slammed the door, I stayed standing. Wolfe reached for his beer with the gravity of a man who'd just finished pruning a dangerous vine. You defended me, I said. Pfui, he replied. I defended myself. I will not abide a bungled accusation in this house. Still, his tone had softened half a degree. And that, in Wolfe's universe, was as close as you got to affection. I sat down, hands loose, eyes staring at the folder Kramer had left. My name had been hijacked, bent, and used like a crowbar. I never liked seeing my name in print, I said. Turns out I like it less when it doesn't belong to me. Wolfe nodded. Identity is sacred. Once stolen, it stains. And somehow, that felt worse than guilt. We had Evelyn's photograph, the forged claim, the vanished brooch, and the fake me. But Wolfe wasn't done yet. He tapped the Lisbon Customs manifest. She claimed it was hers, but it wasn't. The Countess never sold it. It vanished in '44 with a Swiss passport and a trunk of heirlooms. So Evelyn stole it, I asked. No. She acquired it through the ring, which means she wasn't merely a tool. She was a participant. And the man in Lisbon? A middleman, perhaps. Or the true architect. But Miss Drake made herself valuable, then vulnerable. Wolfe's voice took on that lecturing hum. A brooch is leverage, but leverage depends on balance. When the weight shifts, someone always falls. And Evelyn had fallen. But maybe not alone. Wolfe steepled his fingers. We now possess the fragments, fraud, identity theft, stolen antiquities, and murder as punctuation. Nice punctuation, I muttered. He ignored me. The imposter will strike again. He must, to complete the narrative. I shall invite him to do so. How? Wolfe looked almost amused. With a press leak, the insurance company will receive an anonymous tip. Mr. Goodwin intends to file a follow-up claim. Publicly. I whistled. That'll bring him sniffing. Indeed, he will come to erase the threat, but the threat, you see, is waiting. He sipped his beer. This, Mr. Goodwin, is no longer mere homicide. It is theatre. Let us be compelling. And with that, Nero Wolfe closed his eyes. Curtain rising. I was halfway through Fritz's veal stew when the doorbell rang. Fritz, frowning as though the bell had insulted him personally, returned with a plain brown envelope and no messenger in sight. Left at the stoop, he said. No name. Wolfe looked up from his plate with the suspicious dignity of a man asked to eat proof. Open it, Archie. I tore it open. Inside was one glossy photograph, the kind that catches your stomach before your brain catches up. Wolfe's fork froze mid-air. Mine didn't move at all. It was me, smiling, dancing. The same face I shaved every morning, except this one looked like it remembered something I didn't. For a long second, the room was silent, except for the faint ticking of Wolfe's clock, counting the seconds between confusion and dread. The photograph was clean, professionally lit, cropped just enough to be damning. Evelyn Drake in a white gown, me in a tux, her hand on my shoulder, my mouth mid-laugh. The Beaumont charity ball, unmistakable, chandeliers, linen, and enough champagne to baptize an army. I stared at it while my mind tried to sprint in circles. Wolfe said nothing. He just watched me like a cat studying a clockwork mouse. That's your face, he said finally. I'm aware. And your smile. Thanks. I worked on it. He lifted the corner of the photo with one finger. It was mailed, not delivered by post, therefore deliberate. I leaned back. Someone wants to remind me of my social life. He shook his head. Someone wants you to distrust it. And, damn it, they were halfway there. I've been accused of forgetfulness before, usually by women with longer memories than Mercy. But this wasn't a missing detail. It was a missing night. I don't remember it, I said, too flat. You danced with her, Wolfe replied. So it seems. You were laughing. Maybe the punch was good. He didn't bite. He simply sat back, steepling his fingers. It wasn't the kind of forgetting that comes from boredom or beer. It felt like trying to recall a tune from a dream that was never mine. I stared at my own face. That smirk I knew, those eyes caught mid-joke. Only the man in the photo looked content, at ease. I wasn't. If Evelyn Drake had been alive to explain that picture, I'd have found her, but she wasn't, and the picture spoke fluent accusation. Wolfe reached for his magnifier, the kind usually reserved for orchids, or the fine print of deceit. He held the photo at an angle, squinting. Look here, he said. The mirror behind you. A reflection. I leaned in. Sure enough, behind our smiling selves was a half-glimpsed man, face cropped, eyes intent, as though watching the pair of us instead of the dance floor. Coincidence? I asked. Rarely, Wolfe murmured. Composition betrays intent. He tapped the edge of the mirror with his fingernail. The hand of the voyeur is as telling as that of the forger. Observe. The figure is too clear for chance. So somebody photographed the photograph, I said. He nodded once. Or arranged the scene itself. The difference didn't comfort me much. Either way, I'd been framed, literally, if not legally. Wolfe had Saul Panzer in the office within the hour. The man could find his way here blindfolded through fog and sin. Saul studied the photograph without touching it. Recognize the mirror man? Wolfe asked. Saul narrowed his eyes. Julian Farrow, photographer, society events, private portraits, you name it. Fancies himself an artist. You've met him? I asked. Twice. Likes expensive women and cheaper morals. He did work for Drake's crowd. Retouched photos for gossip columns. Reputation for edits. Edits, Wolfe repeated. Meaning fabrication. Meaning he could make the Pope look drunk, Saul said. That did it. The mirror man had a name, and it wasn't one I liked. Wolfe nodded. Thank you, Mr. Panzer. If Mr. Farrow is our artisan, he will attempt to refine his masterpiece soon. And we'd be waiting with magnifiers, not applause. After Saul left, Wolfe turned philosophical, which is never a good sign for my digestion. Archie, he said almost conversationally, how does one define memory? As what keeps me from repeating mistakes. Ah, yet it can be manufactured, can it not? Not mine. He ignored that. If a memory can be forged as easily as a signature, how then does a man distinguish truth from suggestion? By trusting himself, even when the evidence mocks him. I sighed. You're building something here, and I'm not sure if I'm the foundation or the victim. Both, Wolfe said mildly. A memory is like an orchid. It thrives under cultivation and dies under tampering. That was his polite way of saying someone had been pruning mine, and I didn't like the gardener. Let's get something straight, I said. I'm not in the habit of inventing memories, and I'm sure as hell not losing them for sport. You want to question the photo, fine. Question the photographer, but don't act like I'm a walking blackout. Wolfe raised one brow. Temper, Archie. Don't use that tone, I shot back. You think I'd lie to you? He considered it. Too long. That stung worse than I'd admit. I am considering the human capacity for denial, he said finally. Try considering loyalty for once, I said. I was there when half your cases started with bad coffee and worse clients. Wolfe's lips thinned. Pfui. Do not appeal to sentiment. It insults us both. He was right, of course. But at that moment, I didn't feel much like being insulted scientifically. Wolfe stared at the photo again, then said softly, "It is either authentic, retouched, or staged. Each possibility implies a different crime." "Pick one," I said. He ignored me. "If authentic, then you suppress the memory, perhaps to shield yourself from guilt or confusion. If retouched, the image was manipulated to erode your confidence. If staged," he let it hang. I waited. "If staged, then you were never there," he said, "and the face is an imitation, a likeness stolen for leverage." "That's three kinds of trouble," I muttered. "Yes," he said calmly, "but only one culprit. The hand that creates uncertainty always seeks control." "Meaning?" "Meaning," Wolfe said, "that whoever sent this wishes to rewrite you, as they already rewrote her. Her. Evelyn Drake." The room suddenly felt colder. Wolfe went upstairs to the orchids and I was left alone with the photograph. I studied my own face the way a stranger studies a portrait, detached, critical, curious. That smile wasn't one of mine. It was too open, too easy. I tried to remember the feel of her hand, the sound of the orchestra, the scent of perfume. Nothing. Just blank space where a night should have been. It wasn't amnesia, it was absence, like someone had edited the film of my life and spliced out a scene. I told myself it didn't matter, that facts would clear it up, like they always did. But for once, logic didn't feel like armor. It felt like glass, and someone else already had the hammer. When Wolfe came down again, dusk had turned the room the color of weak tea. He poured himself a beer, looked at me, and said almost gently, "What's forgotten by choice leaves a wound. What's forgotten by force leaves a shadow." I didn't answer. He sipped, watching the bubbles collapse. "We will pursue both, the wound and the shadow. They are, I suspect, the same shape." The photograph still lay on the desk between us. Two ghosts frozen in a lie that hadn't decided what kind yet. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, the way a man does before pulling weeds that fight back. "Archie," he murmured, "I dislike mysteries that tamper with memory." "Yeah," I said, "try living in one." And that was the end of dinner. Fritz nearly dropped the butter dish. That's not poetic license. It was 8:33 in the morning, and Wolfe emerged from the elevator not in his house slippers, but in a pair of polished black shoes, and more to the point, wearing a fedora he hadn't touched since Eisenhower took the oath. The hat sat on his head like it had issued a royal summons. "I require you," Wolfe said, not to Fritz but to me, "to accompany me downtown. 10 minutes. I blinked. "Should I alert the mayor?" "No, but if you have a revolver, bring it." That wasn't style. That was Wolfe without his shield. And when the mountain rises from its own foundation, even the pigeons look nervous. 10 minutes later, the war was on. You know it's a peculiar day when I'm the one trying small talk. Wolfe and I shared the back seat of a cab heading through Midtown, his shoulders hunched slightly in a way that suggested both physical discomfort and mental ferocity. I opened with the weather, detoured to breakfast, and even offered the odd gem about a cabbie with 3 wives and a garden on his roof. Nothing. Wolfe's lips barely moved. I knew that look. His mind had already flanked 3 defensive lines and was bayonet deep in enemy trenches. So I settled into silence, watching the steam rise from sewer grates and the sun play coy behind cold October glass. If Wolfe had donned his armor, then whatever lay ahead wasn't negotiation. It was judgment. Julian Farrow's studio was exactly what you'd expect from a man who made his living airbrushing guilt into glamour. Clean, bright, sterile. The walls were a parade of near humans, smiles too symmetrical, cheekbones filed to perfection, all staring out from frames that cost more than a year of Fritz's grocery bills. A tall woman with steel grey hair and nails to match tried to intercept us, but Wolfe's stride didn't so much stop her as pass through her. Mr. Farrow is with a client, she offered. He is now with me, Wolfe said. I trailed him in like a bad idea and found Farrow leaning against a velvet chaise, cigarette in hand, face painted with indifference. Well, Farrow said, not moving. The mountain has moved. I must have sinned greatly. Wolfe nodded once. Yes. Your photograph, Wolfe began, is a forgery. Farrow raised an eyebrow. And yet it resembles reality. How tiresome for you. Wolfe ignored the bait. You staged a moment at a charity ball. You manipulated expression, perspective, reflection. But what you did not erase was motive. Farrow exhaled smoke in a lazy stream. I enhance memory, Mr. Wolfe. That is the highest form of art. And the lowest form of truth. Archie, me, remained against the bookshelf, arms crossed, eyes on the print that had blown a hole in my week. Wolfe stepped closer. The face in the mirror, half-cropped, watching. That is not a trick of light. Coincidence, Farrow murmured, but the smirk flickered. Whose? Silence spread like varnish drying over guilt. He hadn't cracked, not yet. But the frame had started to buckle. You printed the image with care, Wolfe said, now circling the studio like a lawyer sniffing for perjury. Yet the crop leaves one thing curious. Farrow folded his arms, still lounging, but the sharpness in his gaze said he knew the crosshairs had found him. The man in the mirror, Wolfe continued. Why is half his face in? You had the negative. You could have excised him entirely, but you didn't. Farrow tapped ash into a tray shaped like a lion's mouth. Maybe I enjoy imperfection. Unlikely, Wolfe said. Your work is immaculate in its lies. This is deliberate. A pause. Then Wolfe added, You wanted someone to see it, or someone to believe you didn't see it. Farrow's smirk cracked, just slightly, as if a hinge had rusted under scrutiny. And in that moment, we both knew. Wolfe had touched the live wire. I adjusted the image, Farrow said at last, tone cooling. For atmosphere. You adjusted it for leverage, Wolfe replied. Farrow turned his back and lit another cigarette, this one trembling slightly between his fingers. The client paid. For anonymity. I honor that. Even after murder, Farrow didn't flinch. I produce illusions, not corpses. I stepped forward. You produced a very real problem for me, friend. That photograph was crafted, Farrow interrupted, to suggest, not to declare. Name, Wolfe said. Just once. Farrow exhaled. I don't name clients. That's not discretion, it's self-preservation. That was the moment I started wishing we'd brought the revolver. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Anonymous games cost lives, he said, and the air in the studio turned acidic. You are not a neutral party. You are an accomplice in subversion, a technician of ambiguity turned architect of danger. Farrow opened his mouth, then closed it again. His pulse had made a visible leap in his throat. Even the cigarette had begun to burn unevenly. Wolfe adjusted his cuffs. The next time someone offers you money to distort memory, consider that clarity might cost less. With that, he turned. Come, Archie. We left behind a studio thick with smoke, silence, and something sour that smelled like dread. It came by phone. Fritz answered, handed me the receiver with a look that belonged in a funeral home, and I heard the voice of Lon Cohen. Julian Farrow's dead, Lon said. Studio, pills and a staged note. Cops are calling it suicide. Don't. I relayed the facts. Wolfe, seated with a book open but eyes distant, didn't blink for 6 whole seconds. Murder? I asked. Obviously. By who? By necessity. He rose and walked to the globe in the corner, touching it with fingers that had just left battle and now found defeat. They wanted silence, not justice, not revenge, just silence. And they got it. Wolfe nodded, slowly. For now. Farrow had played the game, flirted with artifice, and believed he could step off the board before the blade dropped. He hadn't. Dinner was duck à l'orange. Wolfe barely touched it. Fritz had outdone himself, but it might as well have been chalk dust. Wolfe sat rigid, knife idle, eyes far away. I tried a crack about Farrow's studio being available for lease, but it landed like a fly in a tomb. Beer, I offered. He waved it off. That was when I knew, not just that Wolfe was angry, but that the calculus had turned personal. Guilt for Wolfe was rare and private, like a cellar bottle opened only for grief. He had warned Farrow, and Farrow had died anyway. That didn't fit into any of Wolfe's systems, and that made it dangerous. He wasn't silenced, Wolfe said later, in the office, after dinner had failed to restore equilibrium. He was erased. There is a difference. I nodded. You think it's Evelyn? No. Evelyn Drake is a pawn, not a player. The true architect remains unseen, but not unmarked. He tapped the corner of the photograph, now pinned to the edge of his desk blotter. The smile, the composition, the man in the mirror, all designed for effect, but one flaw. What? Timing. I blinked. Meaning? The image was altered, but the intent predates the moment it captures. That implies planning, not passion. So whoever did this has already begun the final move. Wolfe leaned back. This is no longer a deception, he said quietly. It is now a trap. And for the first time since the whole business began, I wasn't sure whether Wolfe meant to spring it, or had just walked into it. The last time Wolfe locked the front door with that particular click, we were on the verge of getting firebombed by a jilted colonel's nephew. This time, it was quieter. No threats, no telegrams, just the weight of precision descending like velvet curtains. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, turning from the lock like a man who had just sealed the tomb of chaos. No calls, no visitors, no intrusions. This house is now my mind. That wasn't metaphor. The phone wires were pulled. Fritz was instructed to ignore the bell unless it rang twice in succession. Saul Panzer was already upstairs with his notes, and I had the sneaking feeling that I was about to be used as both sounding board and scalpel. Wolfe wasn't bracing for a breakthrough. He was constructing it, with the house as its sanctum. It started with Wolfe seated at his desk, fingers steepled, expression set to unamused deity. Saul and I sat across from him with notebooks, folders, and enough mental debris to tile the Brooklyn Bridge. Chronology, Wolfe said. We begin with fact. Saul opened with the shipping manifest. A small crate, mislabeled, left the port of Hamburg 3 months prior and arrived at a midtown warehouse registered under a shell name. The brooch, Wolfe prompted. Insurance claim filed 12 days before the fire, I said. Valued too high, as if someone expected it to vanish. Forgery, Wolfe asked. Saul nodded. Appraisal certificates fabricated. Company rubber-stamped it, likely didn't look twice. And Evelyn Drake. Named beneficiary on a short-term life policy. Signed 5 weeks ago. Wolfe's lips pressed thin. We weren't looking at coincidence anymore. We were sitting in the center of design, dark, patient, and greedy. She wasn't the architect, Wolfe said, but she wasn't innocent. We all waited. Evelyn Drake, he continued, was in possession of information. She intended to profit from it, but not by selling the brooch, by selling silence. Saul frowned. Blackmail? Wolfe nodded once. The brooch was a symbol, not currency. She wielded it as a threat. To whom? I asked. If it wasn't me, who'd be scared enough to... Wolfe turned. You were the message, not the recipient. Someone used your name as a lever, not against Evelyn, but to keep her in line. That hit like a cue ball to the gut. My name wasn't on a gift card. It was the handle of a blade. She held the brooch, Wolfe said, but someone else forged the hand that pointed it. Saul's brows met like a pickpocket caught mid-reach. There's something else, he said. Buried in the policy records. Someone added a second name, faint, hidden in the third carbon. A false beneficiary. Wolfe didn't move, but I saw his pupils sharpen. Name? Wolfe asked. Harold G. Lowell. The room stilled. That name doesn't exist, Wolfe said. Exactly, Saul replied. It's a ghost. The signature's been lifted from a years-old claim, reused, slipped in to redirect payout after Evelyn's death. Forgery nested in bureaucracy, I muttered. Nice. No, Wolfe said softly. Ugly. This wasn't a fraud of greed. It was preemptive containment. Someone expected Evelyn to die and prepared to profit. Farrow's picture hadn't just been art, it had been architecture, and Evelyn was its cornerstone. Farrow wasn't a photographer, Wolfe said. He was a bricklayer in memory's cathedral. I raised an eyebrow. Come again? He was paid, Wolfe continued, not to capture a moment, but to manufacture it. A party, a mirror, a slant of light. It was theatre. Saul exhaled. He wasn't documenting, he was scripting. Precisely, Wolfe said. The image with you in the background, cropped, elusive, was no accident. It was a lie told in truths. And he died for it. No, Wolfe corrected. He died because he couldn't control the lie. The commission outgrew the artist. There was something cold in that. The kind of chill you get when the stagehands start dying and the curtain hasn't even risen. I cracked a bottle open at my desk, not because it was late, but because my stomach had gone tight around a thought I couldn't shake. Wolfe, I said, what if I did meet her? He looked up. What if I danced with Evelyn Drake at some fogged-up benefit, maybe 6 months ago, and she remembered, but I didn't? That is conceivable, he admitted. And that made me useful, not dangerous, just blank. A face she could use because I'd forgotten. Wolfe didn't answer. He didn't have to. That hit harder than any accusation. Being the weapon was one thing. Being the sheath, empty, convenient and unaware, that cut deeper. He disappeared into the plant room after that. No invitation extended, but I followed, because sometimes silence was worse than storms. He was misting the orchids. Slow, precise, one row at a time. Orchids, he said without turning, are memory incarnate. They carry scars with elegance, a single bruise on a petal, and it never heals, only folds itself deeper. I waited. Human memory is the same. It bends around damage, preserves it, shapes behavior, but not truth. I leaned on the wall. You think I'm bruised? I think, Wolfe said, finally looking at me. You are determining whether the bruise is yours or hers. There wasn't an answer to that. But the steam from the orchids curled like ghost trails through the glass, and I stayed until he stopped speaking. Someone at the insurance firm, Wolfe announced the next morning, is pulling strings. He hadn't shaved, hadn't opened the mail, and the phone still lay belly up on the side table like a stunned fish. Saul, he continued, check the executive staff. Vice presidents, claim adjusters, policy officers. Look for someone who signed off on Evelyn's policy and has since buried it. Name? Saul asked. Not yet, but they knew Evelyn, feared her perhaps, enough to fabricate records, enough to fund Farrow. And enough to kill, I added. Wolfe gave me a glance sharp enough to shave with. There is no such thing as enough, he said, only motive, method, and margin. That night, with the windows closed and the air heavy, I poured a single beer and didn't say a word. Not to Wolfe, not to Fritz, not to the city pressing in past the curtains. I'd been used, not framed. That was theatrical. This had been more surgical. My name, my face, even my forgetfulness, all of it had been sewn into someone else's escape plan. And that wasn't going to stand. The thing about me, I don't go in for revenge. It's messy, loud, and usually stupid. But justice, quiet, sharp, earned, that I'll chase through brick walls. For Evelyn, for Farrow, for me. Just before midnight, Wolfe picked up the phone like it had offended him and dialed slowly. This is Nero Wolfe, he said. I will expect you tomorrow, 11 a.m., not later. He didn't say who. He didn't need to. The voice on the other end, I couldn't hear it. Didn't get a rebuttal. Just Wolfe's second sentence. You will bring the original document, or do not come at all. He hung up, turned to me and said, "Sleep." I didn't ask why, because that wasn't a summons. That was the opening bell. By midnight, the brownstone looked less like a home and more like a courtroom run by insomnia. Thunder rolled outside, lazy but deep, while Fritz set out chairs with the quiet fatalism of a man arranging seats for judgment. Wolfe sat behind his desk, motionless but immense. I was by the globe, not sure if I was bailiff or bait. Then came the knock. Kramer first, grumbling. Then Saul, calm and unreadable. Leonard Hirth from the insurance office, tight-lipped and sweating. Clara Vane, pale and jumpy. They entered the office like cards dealt by a nervous dealer. Wolfe said nothing. He just watched the storm break against the windows and waited for silence to grow uncomfortable enough to confess on its own. That was always his favourite opening act. If you've never seen Wolfe do an inventory of souls, imagine a banker auditing honesty. He didn't look at people. He looked through them. Kramer shifted in his chair. Hirth adjusted his tie. Clara fidgeted with her purse as if it might produce absolution. Saul just waited, professional as ever. Wolfe's eyes moved once, from left to right, and you could practically hear the drawers closing in his head. He noted coughs, posture, tremors, each one filed under its own private heading. When he finally spoke, it was to no one in particular. "Truth," he said, "is like the weather. Some endure it, others hide indoors." The next roll of thunder landed right on cue. Kramer was never built for patience. "Wolfe," he barked, "if you hauled me out of bed for a séance, I'll have your license framed, in evidence." Wolfe sighed, which in his vocabulary meant, how regrettably human. "Inspector," he said, "I assure you this is no séance. The dead are silent. The living, unfortunately, are not." That got a snort out of me. Kramer glared, but I've had worse from cab drivers. "You claim," Wolfe continued, "that my assistant is implicated. You are mistaken. But it is not your fault. Your quarry has hidden behind him with professional skill." "Behind him?" "Yes. And now we shall remove the mask." The room went still, except for rain clawing at the window like impatient evidence. "Miss Drake," Wolfe began, his tone judicial, "was not fearless, quite the opposite. Fear governed every step she took these past months." Hirth twitched. Wolfe noticed. "She worked for your firm, Mr. Hirth. She uncovered a fraud, one not of her making. She attempted to flee it, but was bound by the same paper web that sustained it. Her life insurance policy was not protection, it was a snare. She believed she could negotiate her way free." Kramer frowned. "Negotiate with who?" "With her employer," Wolfe said. "The man who signed the falsified policies. The man who realized exposure meant ruin. The man who decided her silence was worth more than her breath." Wolfe turned his head, slowly to Hirth. "And fear," he finished, "is never an even exchange." "Evelyn needed leverage," Wolfe continued. "She found it in a name both visible and blameless. Archie Goodwin." I felt every eye shift my way. Not flattering. "She used his name," Wolfe went on, "because association with my office would deter suspicion. No one would believe a man in my employ could be complicit in insurance fraud." "That's flattering," I said. "It was pragmatic," Wolfe replied. "She forged his signature on the claim. The true culprit needed only to let the shadow stand, and the scent would lead to my door, not theirs." Kramer growled again. "You saying she set him up?" "No," Wolfe said. "I'm saying she was instructed to." That hit like thunder. Even Saul glanced up. Wolfe leaned back. "And that instruction came from this room's most nervous heartbeat. Julian Farrow," Wolfe said, "was no mere portraitist. He was a craftsman of deception, paid to sculpt falsehoods that appeared authentic." Hirth's knuckles went white. He doctored the photograph of Miss Drake and Mr. Goodwin, creating the illusion of intimacy. It was a weapon, Proof of association. Pharaoh's motive. To profit twice, once from his commission, once from extortion. Kramer blinked. Extortion who? Both parties, Wolfe said evenly. He threatened Miss Drake with exposure and threatened his employer with evidence of the forgery he'd helped construct. Smart guy, I muttered. Too smart, Wolfe corrected. He underestimated how swiftly a frightened man can graduate to homicide. Hurth's handkerchief came out again. Wolfe's gaze followed it, lazy but lethal. You'll forgive me, Mr. Hurth, Wolfe said, if I use your profession's vocabulary. He folded his hands. You adjusted figures, falsified claims, and created phantom beneficiaries. Evelyn Drake discovered one such entry. When she threatened disclosure, you arranged an insurance payout under my assistant's name to divert suspicion. Then you paid Pharaoh to reinforce the illusion. Hurth's mouth worked but produced only air. When Miss Drake realized the scope, Wolfe continued, she panicked. You silenced her. Poison in a cordial glass. When Pharaoh attempted his own leverage, you visited him that night. You made certain his final photograph would be self-portraiture. Kramer's jaw tightened. You've got proof? Indeed, Wolfe said, and nodded to Saul, who produced the ledger copy. Hurth lunged, but it was too late. The arithmetic of guilt had balanced itself. Clara Vane had been holding herself together with sheer nerve. One more minute of silence, and it snapped. I saw him, she whispered. Mr. Hurth, at Pharaoh's studio, the night he died. Wolfe inclined his head, not triumphant, simply precise. You are certain? Yes. I thought it was business. He told me not to mention it. Her voice broke. I didn't know what it meant, until now. Kramer turned, eyes narrowing at Hurth. Hurth sagged back into the chair, the kind of collapse that happens when a lie realizes it's unemployed. That will suffice, Wolfe said quietly. The last filament of pretense has burned through. The thunder outside answered for her. Kramer hated it. You could see it in the way he reached for the cuffs, like a man grabbing his own ulcer. All right, Hurth, he growled. On your feet. Hurth muttered something about injustice, but Wolfe's tone cut through it. Inspector, injustice is the byproduct of incomplete logic. Tonight, we are complete. Kramer scowled. Yeah, you're complete. I'm exhausted. He turned to me. Goodwin, tell your boss one day he's going to talk himself into contempt. Impossible, Wolfe murmured. I already hold it. That earned him one of Kramer's darker looks. Then the door closed behind them, and the brownstone breathed again. When the last echo of Kramer's boots died, I fetched 2 bottles from the cabinet. Wolfe took his with the solemnity of a priest accepting confession. To the reclamation of truth, he said. And my reputation, I added. Incidental, he said, but his eyes softened. Still, well earned. We drank. The storm outside had given up, leaving the windows streaked but peaceful. Fritz would be relieved. So was I. As Wolfe rose, slow, deliberate, every step of gravity restored, he glanced back toward the empty chairs. Order, he said, is not found. It is reimposed. Then he left for the orchids, and I finished my beer. The night finally felt like ours again. The city, for once, was showing restraint. No sirens dopplering up Madison, no reporters lurking behind potted hydrangeas, no doorbell shrilling like an insult. Just the slow grind of a sanitation truck 2 blocks down, and the distant metallic yawn of a mailbox being emptied. Inside, Fritz was already beating eggs like they owed him money, and the brownstone had resumed its natural order. Eggs at 9, peace by noon. Wolfe hadn't said a word yet, and I hadn't pushed. After the week we'd had, silence was practically sacred. I was leaning against the hall desk, flipping through an old charity ball program. Why it was there, don't ask me. And there it was, tucked between the pages like a pressed orchid. The memory. Wartime, 43 maybe. One of those vaguely patriotic fundraisers where champagne flowed more than sense. She'd worn red gloves. Not burgundy, not crimson. Red. Like danger or a dare. We'd danced exactly once, talked even less. But as the band struck its fifth Cole Porter number, she'd murmured something I never quite unpacked. Don't let them write my ending. Strange what the mind keeps filed away while dumping birthdays and dry cleaning tickets. I turned to say something flip about memory being a thief with bad taste. But Wolfe had the globe open like it was scripture. Not a flicker. Just the crackle of newsprint and the scent of orchid pollen lingering from his morning rounds. But as I shifted to go pour coffee, he glanced up. Brief. 1 second. Maybe less. A glance that said he'd been listening since the egg whisking began, and likely before that. Wolfe never missed a beat. He simply chose which ones were worth responding to. In the plant room, I found him inspecting a Paphiopedilum mordier, with the kind of concentration most men reserve for bank statements or divorce papers. He used the smallest pruning shears, like a jeweler filing gold. Without looking at me, he said, "Even the smallest lapse, Archie, like a bruised petal, can rot the whole stem, left unattended." I didn't answer right away. He wasn't talking about orchids. Not really. Wolfe has a way of embedding post-mortems in metaphor, like burying truth inside a bloom. That's his version of confession. I leaned against the wall and gave him my most agreeable shrug. Or maybe, I said, some petals fall and the rest of the stem keeps doing just fine. That got a sideways look. I added, some memories deserve to vanish. It's probably a mercy when they do. Wolfe didn't argue. He simply returned his attention to the orchid, snipped a yellowing tendril, and let the silence do the talking. That was as close as he ever came to letting a point go unchallenged, which meant, somewhere in that big head of his, he was giving it weight. By the time we sat at the table, Fritz was beaming like the Pope on Easter morning. He served roast capon with spring greens and a mustard vinaigrette that could have gotten him knighted in some small European republic. He poured the wine, nodded once at Wolfe, then turned and gave me something between a wink and a bow. Translation: the storm was over. The temple had been cleansed. If peace could be declared via poultry, this was it. When we returned to the office, Wolfe surprised me. He didn't grunt or tilt his head or even reach. He simply opened the drawer, pulled out 2 bottles of Remmers and handed me one. No ritual, no preamble, just popped the caps and clinked. To clarity, he said. Or, I replied, whatever counts as clarity in our moral swamp. We drank. Not deeply. Just enough to remind ourselves we'd made it through another philosophical jungle with most of our limbs attached. For once, even Wolfe didn't argue the metaphor. The afternoon mail had arrived and, true to custom, I signed the ledger. But this time, I added a little extra flair to the G in Goodwin. Nothing flashy, just a subtle curve, a loop like a signature reclaiming its swagger. Wolfe, buried in Volume 2 of Liddell and Scott, didn't look up. It's nice, I said aloud, having my name back in working order. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The ledger stayed open on the desk like a passport stamped cleared. He turned a page with exaggerated precision. Identity, he said, is a costume tailored by memory and worn with delusion. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah, well, long as the costume's dry cleaned, I'm good with delusion. He almost smiled. Almost. And the brooch? He asked, still not looking at me. Ah, I said. They didn't bill me for it, which is more than I can say for half the women I've met this month. That earned me a grunt, which, in Wolfe's emotional lexicon, was practically applause. He returned to his book, one finger tucked into the spine, and his chair absorbing him like an obedient throne. I checked my watch, adjusted my tie, and stepped toward the door. No dramatic lighting, no orchestral swell, just Wolfe and his orchids, me and my shadow stretching toward the hall. Case closed. friendship intact. The city outside, already moving on. And so, as the last echoes of Evelyn's name fade into the silence of Wolfe's study, the case closes, not with triumph, but with something quieter, understanding. A stolen brooch, a blurred memory, a name that meant something different to everyone who spoke it. In the end, perhaps the real mystery was not in the lie, but in the parts of ourselves we choose to forget. Do you believe forgetting is a kindness or a crime of its own? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.